So hello, welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and we are here in this analysis of the vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. And you want to watch this because you're going to learn three things. The first one is how to command a conversation. The second one is how to use advanced persuasion techniques to make someone agree with you or anyone agree with you. And the third is how do you disarm someone's argument before they bring it up. This and more in this analysis. And by the way, it's going to be longish, so you can find chapters in the description of this video, so you can just watch in chunks if you wish. So let's start this from the beginning. We're going to do this in chronological order. And from the very beginning, we already had some nice body language clues. The first ones, I'm gonna zoom in, is that they had a similar posture when they were announced by the hosts. We don't have sound yet. It's not necessary. We just want to see their body language. And then we had, thanks to the camera panning and directing, we did not have a full approach. We just have of that handshake, that first handshake. I think it was full. They were a bit reluctant. We're going to compare this with the handshake at the end of the debate, but I think they were a bit reluctant, especially because of their faces. Okay, at the beginning they had their differences, and you're gonna see throughout this debate that they agreed in many issues, but maybe J.D. Vance had some kind of ace on his sleeve regarding this. But something that I noticed that after that first handshake, Walz changed his body language, and he used to be with his hands on the podium, but after the handshake, he decided to cover his genitals. A bit defensive after that first handshake. Vance was exactly the same after the first handshake, and then the questions began. The first question was about, let's see, I'm gonna zoom in here. The first question was for Tim Walz: do you support Israel doing a preemptive strike? And this was his answer. I'm not gonna play, of course, all the clips. I'm just going to play clips that are relevant to our analysis, and I'm going to comment on them after I play them. So this is the first
October
clip.
7th.
See, so you can see the captions.
October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Now, hands down, this was I think the most nervous part on Tim Walz. That was his very first answer. We weren't even 1 or 2 minutes into the debate, and he made a couple gaffes. He repeated the word fundamental. He said Iran instead of Israel. He made some very uncomfortable pauses, but we could say that he hadn't warmed up correctly. And this is something that you're going to see throughout the whole debate. I'm going to mention some body language details that are just going to be repeated many times throughout the debate. So I'm just going to mention them once. Like this face that he did, I think this is part of his usual body language baseline. The problem is that the face that you see is like he's a bit terrified. That is the hunch that you have, because the general emotion that you see on his face is about terror. Yes, he's talking about the war in the Middle East, and maybe he's afraid or worried about that. But I don't think this is the right approach, especially if you want to look presidential, or in this case, vice presidential. But in this case, the very first part of his question, his answer was really full of nervousness. I'm gonna give him a pass on that one, because at the start of any speech or debate, you can be a bit cold or not warm up, it's essential that you warm up before entering the scenario, that you do breathing exercises, you go for it. And at the same time, I think you're going to see in this clip, in the following clip, that I think that he practiced some of his responses, and notice what he does here. I'm going to mention what he does in this following clip.
Those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House.
Now, I think that he had practiced his answers. Not a bad thing, because you're gonna see later that J.D. Vance also practiced his answers a lot. But I think Walz did not practice them enough, because he makes these uncomfortable pauses. And now he's opting for the ad hominem attacks on Donald Trump. But you know that in many of his answers, what he's gonna do is to resort to attacking Trump. That is the usual narrative. That is not surprising. But you're gonna see how it actually harms his credibility, because he doesn't. It's like he will invest part of his 2 minutes into just attacking Donald Trump. Maybe Vance is gonna do the same with Kamala Harris, but who is gonna bring the numbers? And something that I want to mention here is that throughout the whole debate, both of them looked at each other. When Walz was speaking, then Vance was looking at him, and vice versa. When Vance was speaking, Walz was, well, you get the idea. And you can see here that, well, even if Vance was looking at Walz, you're going to see that in very, very few instances, if none at all, Vance nods or agrees non-verbally with Walz. Something that is not going to happen with Walz, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So let's keep watching the following clip so we can see. And this is the part that I tell you that maybe he had to practice a bit more his answers.
Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was.
Notice that he says them, and no, it was not them, it was Donald Trump, and he corrects himself after a pause.
Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter.
Notice that Vance has made sure to look at his opponent all this time and keeping a neutral face. That is something that you do, that to acknowledge that your opponent is talking. That is being polite and respectful, but you make sure to not have any facial expression or nod to what they are saying, because it seems like you're agreeing with them. And that is dangerous, because maybe they are saying things that you don't agree with them in any way. And we're going to see a couple body language markers in here in Walz.
We will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
A couple of things that you're going to see. Both of them, not only Walz, both of them, they, at the end of the answers, they press their lips. That is a bit of tension. That is a strong emotional reaction. Both of them are doing that. In this case, we're seeing the first answer from Walz. We see that he presses his lips. It's a classic display. Sometimes can be frustration, sometimes can be a strong emotion. In this case, it's just that tension from the debate. But Walz does something else. That is this. Like, he doesn't wait until the hosts in asking the following question or ask the question back to Vance. He always looks down right after answering after giving his answers. I think that I don't think helps him much. It doesn't help him at all. And something that I wanted to mention at the same time is that you can see that Vance posture is a bit more relaxed. His shoulders are relaxed. There's an easy tip. You can see that his collar, the collar of his suit, is perfectly fit. It's because his shoulders are in this position. It's like my collar in this case. But in the case of Walz, you see that the collar is a bit high. I don't think it was tailoring. I saw that Walz's suit was fitting okay, but it could be that his shoulders were a bit tense. So if I do this, you can see that my collar is going to go up if I go tense. It sometimes happens to me when I'm on a live stream, for example, and I grow tense with a topic. I could be raising my shoulders, and that's going to raise my collar. That's an easy way to spot if someone is more nervous than usual. And it's something that is a very, very bad image for Walz. Like, looking down, I understand that he wanted to look at his notes and maybe write down some ideas that he got on the fly. That's possible, but not a good look. Not a good look by any means. That is going to cost him some points. So let's see what happened here. Now the question was on Vance court. And the question was about, what do you think about a preemptive Israel doing a preemptive strike? And he had 2 minutes to answer that question. Now, notice what he does. Notice what essentially what he does in the first 60 seconds flat.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me.
Well, I'm going to make a pause so I can explain what he's doing. Instead of answering the question directly, like jumping straight into the question, he made sure to pause, and I'm going to introduce myself. And he acknowledges that maybe most of the American public doesn't know either him or Walz. That was, you're going to see some very polite attitudes from Vance. In this case, he was about to introduce himself, but he made sure to, say that maybe Walz is also a relatively unknown politician for the general American public, and he included him. And then, instead of answering the question about Israel, he began introducing himself. I'm going to say something else about that in a minute.
And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again.
Now, that was 1 minute exactly. That was a 1 minute flat. This was absolutely on point. But what happens next is that he mentions he continues his answer, but he goes to the main point before even answering the question. And his main point is that Trump went for peace through strength.
Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength.
And after he says that, that's when he finally answers the question in the last 15 seconds of the 2 minutes. And when I say last 15 seconds, is exactly 2 minutes. The last 15 seconds of exactly, very precisely 2 minutes.
Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
So he's just 15. He answered the question in 15 seconds, but he made sure to make an introduction for himself and say where his answer comes from, make the statement that Donald Trump was looking for or is looking for peace through strength, and finally answer the question. That is commanding the conversation, or in this case, the debate. You ask me a question. This is the first question that you're asking me. I have 2 minutes to answer that. I'm not going to answer the question directly, but I'm going to use that first question to lead the conversation with the framing. He is framing himself, like in the sense of how can we perceive him if so many people don't know him. I really did not know him when he was picked as a VP. I got to know him through all these interviews and especially this debate. But that was a very special strategy to make sure that, okay, I'm going to answer your questions, but first I'm going to introduce myself. That is the way that you command a conversation. And to make sure that you keep polite, he made sure to mention, something that he's going to do over and over again, the host's name, Margaret. He's going to do it many times. And when he addresses Walz, he's going to call him Tim many times. You know that people's first name is the most beautiful sound to any of us, and Vance is using it to his advantage. And another thing is that when they are speaking, he makes sure after he has finished his answer, he doesn't lower his gaze immediately to his notes. He keeps his eye contact with the hosts, which is not only polite, but is to, present himself as trustworthy and confident. Notice that he is also pressing his lips in the same way as Walz did. Again, it is a tense scenario. They were getting just started, so it's natural that he displays that same tension that Walz was displaying. But now that we have, there's the counterpoint. Walz is going to reply to Vance's reply. Let's see what Walz is about to say.
Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Now, this is when I want to mention that Tim Walz was way better than I expected in this debate. You see that it's like he got into the actual gears, like kick into the gears. I don't know how it's the expression, but he sounds way more confident than 1 minute ago. Okay, he has the better speaking cadence. It's like he remember his lines, but sometimes he's not remember his lines, but it's more like he's responding to something that Vance said, and that's when your brain begins to think faster. But let's see who is the fastest thinker here. And right now, the next step that we are is that he lowers his gaze again right at the end of his answer. His answer was way better in terms of voice and speech, but the mistake of lowering his gaze right at the end, he repeats that, and he's going to do it many times. But it is subtracting him points in the nonverbal communication department. And now we're gonna see an actual debate technique from Vance. Notice what he is going to do and going to explain it after the
Diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine.
Notice how he made sure to connect something that the host had just said with something that Walz had just said to make an argument about Kamala Harris being, the sitting vice president, so the one who was in charge of everything. So it's not like you just memorize the stuff for a debate. You have to memorize your points. You have to dominate your points from A to C in every way and know what are the questions that the hosts are going to ask, and know how to reply to, your weak points, because every politician and every policy has weak points. But this is thinking on the fly and using what the hosts are saying and what Walz is saying to craft a beautiful argument in 15 seconds that, drives your point home. And it's like, also, it's a way of saying, I am paying attention to you, I'm listening to you, to the hosts, I'm listening to you, I'm paying attention to you, to Walz, and that is being polite. I'm listening to you, I'm paying attention, but this is what I really think about what you're saying. The next spot is one key word that Vance used to soften a blow. Let's see if you can spot it.
And you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So
notice that he said the word appreciate. I appreciate Governor Walz for bringing that up. He's going to use this kind of words. He's going to use some kind of sentences to make sure that every single point that he agrees, or every single point that Walz brings and helps Vance's point, Vance is going to acknowledge it. And that is for a reason that you're about to find out, and you will be able to use it yourself for your advantage. But first we have to go for the next clip, and this is how you engage the audience. Let's see if you can spot the technique that Vance uses to engage the audience.
When was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
He is engaging the audience, asking a question, a very easy question, and maybe it's not that easy. Maybe you have to look for the facts online, but it's also like a challenge, like a dare, like look for it, look for the answer, and you'll find out. I'm not stating the fact, that would be one way to do it, but instead he uses a question, he poses it as a question so the audience can find it for themselves. And of course, the answer is going to be his statement that Donald Trump was the only president in the last 40 years that did not start a war. And now we're going to talk about Vance speaking on climate change. And look at the interaction between them, both of them.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of two grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them.
Notice that Vance uses storytelling, in this case of a photograph of a tragedy that happened to two grandparents and a young child. And it's obvious that any human being with hot-blooded human being is going to, affected by that story. And he uses that story to engage with Walz. I'm sure that Governor Walz
Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people.
To the point that Walz agrees, that he nods. He has to do it. Like maybe it's not something that he's doing. He's not forced to do it, but he's doing it out of empathy. And yes, I think Walz was doing it out of empathy. But Vance, and this is the interesting part, Vance was doing it on purpose to hook Walz on that empathy. This is a strategy. This is the way that Vance was like drawing Walz in with his ideas. This is a strategy that is a bit risky in debates. But if you do it right, it pays off. And you're going to see how it pays off in the long run? How do you get your opponent to agree with you on certain topics, and how, well, you can use it for later? That's what I mentioned. The persuasion techniques you can use to make anyone agree with you, but you're going to find it in a minute. First, this is how he answers that question about the hurricane and the disaster. 45 seconds in. Notice that he makes sure to have this long intros. Vance has this long intros to have this, maybe introduce himself or have some storytelling to speak about a dramatic event. He wants to paint images in our minds so we can better connect with them. Okay, and at the same time, lure Walz into his ideas. Pay attention to this.
And Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer.
Notice how he acknowledges the fact of climate change. He makes sure to mention all the points in which both Donald Trump and himself agree with the premise of climate change. And there comes the part of carbon emissions. And that's when he flips the script about climate change.
One of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do?
Now, this was, in my opinion, this is how you disarm a weapon of your opponent before they use it. You know that at some point, Walz could have talking about that carbon emission, that humans' carbon emissions cause climate change. And Vance said that it was fruitless, it was useless to discuss that at the debate. So he said, what if we agree with the Democrats in this regard? What if we agree with people who affirm that climate change is produced by mainly by carbon emissions of humans? That way, you're acknowledging what you know that your opponent is going to say at some point, so they cannot use that argument anymore. You're saying, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're right. You cannot, the other party, in this case Walz, cannot use that anymore. How does Vance follow that strategy, that tactic?
So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Now, he was mentioning that since all this production of these essential goods were in China, and China has so many carbon emissions, then the sensible thing to do, if you're worried about climate change and you're worried about carbon emissions, is to bring those manufacturing into the United States, back in the United States, so you can A, have a cleaner manufacturing, and B, have more jobs for American citizens. So notice how he doesn't enter in conflict with climate change. And I'm going to show you some clips of Donald Trump talking about climate change, but he uses the concept of climate change to his advantage to disarm Walz, and at the same time use it to prove your own point that it is wrong that these essential goods are produced in China and they should be produced in the United States. That's how you turn some kind of weakness or sensible topic into, well, your own advantage. Let's keep watching. It's Walz turn this time.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane.
Notice what he did. He said that, well, he said the words that...
Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement.
We got close to an agreement. So you see that Vance is making sure that Walz cannot enter in conflict with him. And as the debate progresses, Walz is going to repeat more and more times that he agrees with Vance. It's like a Jedi mind trick because it works. You're going to see a bit later on.
With this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused.
The problem is that Walz is just describing the Wikipedia background of that. A debate is not the place to have a lot of description. It would help if you use storytelling about what you're saying, that coalition, those officials, what they do. With storytelling would have been much better to illustrate his point. But I think he got a bit nervous and he had just to improvise, just because Vance got that weapon out of his hands. And, well, now you're going to see that Walz was fairly composed in his reply to Vance, actually, the second part.
My farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real.
Notice that at no point Vance has made any sort of denying with his head or nodding or facial expression. He's looking at Walz, but he is remaining neutral. And in this segment, I must say that, yes, it was much better Walz delivery. And he was talking about farmers and what farmers did. You see, it's way more useful and more persuasive if you paint your story, your narrative, with the actual protagonists of that narrative. In this case, he was talking about farmers and what they and what they work on. That was a bit better than the first part that was a Wikipedia page. But now let's talk about climate change again. And well, Vance is going to answer a very sensitive question about climate change, because this is the question.
President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
President Trump has called climate change a hoax. And just for the sake of being fair with this analysis, I'm going to play the following clip so we confirm that is an actual thing.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax.
The president has tweeted climate change skepticism at least 115 times, including a claim that the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese.
I think that was pretty clear, right? So we can move on to see what did Vance answer in that regard.
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing.
Notice how he kind of, avoided like saying yes or no to the fact that Donald Trump actually said that climate change is a hoax. He avoided confirming or denying, and instead he went for the actual argument that he wants to hammer over and over again, that if Kamala Harris was really interested in curbing climate change and carbon emissions, she would make sure to bring all those manufacturing jobs back to America, which she didn't. And how he continues. At this point, I have to warn you that this is the only moment that I'm going to comment on one policy, because something that is really interesting to me, which is nuclear.
We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it.
He was being called out because he was already over the time, which when you're passionate about something, well, it's natural that you go a bit over time. I think Walz, I don't remember Walz being called out on the time. I think that he made sure to be on his allotted time at all times. Yeah, but it's important to say that yes, Trump did. I did some research, and Trump did in his term some work to push nuclear energy. Trump signed the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities, the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, and a couple more things. You can find it online. But to be fair, because I want to be fair, I find out that the Biden-Harris administration also had their steps towards, nuclear. President Biden signed the Advance Act, which aims to streamline permitting for new reactor designs. That is great. The Department of Energy provided a $1.5 billion conditional loan guarantee to restore and restart a nuclear plant of Michigan. And there was the bipartisan infrastructure law for fund the design and demonstration of 2 Generation 4 advanced small modular reactors. I'm fascinated by nuclear. I think that it is one of the cleanest and safest forms of energy, and with the current demands and the future demands, it's going to be a hot topic. So I just wanted to pause on that. I'm going to zoom in here because I want to see my notes. And now you're going to see that Vance is going to control the conversation again, because he's going to be asked a question about mass deportations. You know that is a sensitive topic. Are you going to deport moms with their children? Are you going to deport vulnerable people? And he flips the conversation this way.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding.
He made sure to switch the concept from deportations to the bleeding, or so many people crossing the border. And then he made sure to be clear about what Donald Trump and himself mean when they talk about mass deportations.
What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants.
Start with the criminal migrants. This is important. Criminal migrants. And you know that the ICE document that was released not long ago, like a couple days ago, was damning a testimony of what Kamala Harris has done to the United States, and Joe Biden as well, because they were in the same ticket. So in this case, you're gonna see that the criminal migrants is mentioned by Vance, but it's never mentioned by Walz. That is interesting.
We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue.
You know, because Donald Trump blocked that border bill and all the stuff.
I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days.
So this is something that Walz exposed that confirms what Kamala Harris has been saying. Like, they are not that interested in the prosecution of the illegal migrants. Kamala Harris has mentioned the prosecution of the cartels that smuggle people through the border, but not of the criminal migrants, criminal illegal migrants, of the criminals at no point. And Walz makes sure to mention and hammer the point that, we're going to speed up the asylum process, like the admission of people into the United States. I mean, that is great in many ways, because many people actually deserve that, and many people I know that are working hard people are going to, earn that privilege. But he never mentions what they are going to do with the criminals. It would have been pretty easy to just disarm Vance's argument with say, I agree with you, criminals should be deported. At no point, I repeat, at no point of this debate, Walz said anything like that. And I think that is a critical issue that we should all be taking notes. And the next clip is this.
And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected.
No, this is the part that they had agreed that they were not to fact check. The hosts were not going to fact check. And all of a sudden, they began to fact check in the sense that, oh, they have a lot of Haitians, migrants, and they are legal migrants. And they said a couple more things. And Vance decided to interrupt. And this is what some feminists out there are saying. Oh, how rude was Vance of treating them like this. But you're going to see what he says. I'm going to explain why he said that.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a
It's like he's saying that, okay, you are saying that there are all these legal migrants, Haitian or of any nationality in the United States, but you have to remember that that legal status is just downloading an app and having just pressing a button and that's it. Like you have a parole or something, and you can see that Walz's face was, oh my God, what do I say to that? How do I respond to that? I should be saying something. And he was thinking on his toes, really fast to see what I could answer
of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our...
You see that at this point, Walz knew what he was going to answer. Okay, this is my time to shine. This is what I'm going to this is how I'm going to reply. This is how I'm going to fact check him in real time.
Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Those laws have been in the book since 1990. But then Vance replies.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990.
Vance began to say, okay, but the app and the mobile phones did not exist back in 1990. What Vance is trying to say is that it's insanely easy right now to be a legal migrant in the United States, and he was muted. His microphone was muted all of a sudden, and he just couldn't, but he got his point across. Okay, he interrupted the flow of the debate. He had the right because the rules said that the hosts could not fact check anybody, and since they fact check Vance, he wanted to make his point clear. You're gonna talk about legal migrants. I'm going to talk about legal migrants and what legal means for Kamala Harris. Okay, this is Tim Walz's answer to how are you going to pay for all that? That is important, right?
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand.
Okay, that is great. We expected that you were going to mention the middle class at some point, Tim. But how are you going to pay for all that Kamala and you say that you're going to do?
Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best. More people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
I don't know, Tim.
The things that they need.
That single shoulder shrug at the end, that doesn't give me much confidence on what you're saying. And by the way, that the wealthiest paying their fair share, it is, I don't have the calculations with me right now, but no, it is simply not enough. And if they are talking about unrealized capital gains tax, well, that is going to be that is going to be the a jungle. But let's move on. Okay, I was just wanted to point out after this that when Walz answered this question, he lowered his face again immediately. Not a good look again. Not a good look. But this is how Vance move on with that topic. See, fit this and play.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear.
Notice that Vance again says that some things that Tim Walz has said sound pretty good. Again, it's like I don't know what is the term. It's like sugar coating. I know that it's not honey pot. It's like different thing. But it's like sugar coating. Like some of the things that Tim says make sense, and that is like trying to agree in some topics. And in that way, you actually discern your opponent, because your opponent, depending on who they are, of course, if they care or not, they would say, okay, well, he is like Vance is agreeing in some topics, is giving me like, okay, you're right, so maybe I should do the same. It's like a bit of reciprocity. Vance is trying to spark that reciprocity of empathy in Walz, and that is going to happen sooner than later. But first, let's look at Walz's face reaction. He was absolutely terrified. You remember that terrified expression at the start of this video? Well,
to be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good.
He has his tense brows, in all those wrinkles in his brow. You see that, and he presses his lips. Gonna play it.
It even sounds pretty good.
And he swallows hard.
Good. Here's what you won't.
Oh my God, he was scared. Maybe scared in the sense that he wanted to know, how do I reply to this? How do I reply? And especially when Vance is mentioning all those things that we agree on. How can I attack him without looking like, a jerk? And this was Vance's answer to how all these experts from these universities, and you say that some of them said that Kamala Harris had taken their words out of context. But anyway, this is how Vance answers to those claims.
When people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers.
You can hear to all the experts that you want, but how were you, the American citizens, how do you feel? How was your experience under Trump's first term, his first term as a president? That just beats any expert, because people are going to remember, all right, I remember this and such and such and such, and I could pay my bills and how I felt. That drives the point home more effectively than any expert in any magazine or in any university.
And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever.
This is when I noticed that Walz was going to lose it for a second. I mean, again, I mentioned that Walz was better than I expected throughout the whole debate, but this was the moment when he says nurses, teachers, and whatever, especially that whatever sounds like disrespectful.
And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever.
Truck drivers, whatever. That whatever is a bit resentful, right? I think he was a bit, was kind of unhinged by that point, and then he had to regulate his emotions, so he didn't do anything stupid. But at that point, you could see that he was losing it. Not many moments of the debate were like this, but this was absolutely one of them.
Teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever.
And then, well, we have this clip that was very fun, because you're going to see Vance complicit look at the camera, I think that he did many times. Like, look at what this guy is saying.
Last year's president. That's what's wrong with the system.
It was very fun to watch. Saying, "What are you really listening to this guy?" But let's move on, because Walz had more things to say, and at this point, you will see that every single time that Vance has, lured Walz into agreeing with him, this is when he finally concedes. And Walz says this.
So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this.
That's the kind of things that maybe don't look as good, because you're doing it as a reaction. The problem is here for Walz is that Vance did that first in a proactive way. He mentioned just that. And Walz did that on a reactive way, reacting to Vance's word. And it looks like, all right, I need to say this. So when you act in a reactive way, your body language is going to look reactive, and of course, you're not gonna look as confident as you would expect, as you would want. But let's take a look at this following remark from Vance.
So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver low.
Look at this. Is just a poem. This is just a poem. You're playing whack-a-mole. It's like Vance is saying, "Oh, I'm so worried about you, Tim, because you have such a tough job here." This is just masterful from Vance. This is masterful trolling from Vance.
Lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
That was savage. It was savage in many ways. But then Walz made sure to retort. This was when he was talking about, he was asked the question, Walz was asked the question about that discrepancy between being in Hong Kong and not being in Hong Kong, and all those stories from China. There was a long non-answer from him, and I have to acknowledge the hosts doubled down on the question. But did you misspoke, or can you explain this discrepancy of where you were at that time? And he had to relent and answer this.
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Yeah, you see that he was doing the more crazy stuff, the craziest faces he did when he knew that he was caught lying. Especially that pause. That is not an editing of sound. That was an actual silence of him.
I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in.
Yeah, he was caught with that lie. Not a good look. Not a good look, Tim. And of course, he presses his lips. He looks at Vance and lowers his gaze again. Oh my God. Very bad. And now, Vance uses another tool in his arsenal, that is putting Biden against Kamala Harris. Watch.
Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record.
Notice that Vance has this trunk topic, this main topic, which is bringing back or keeping jobs in America secure. That is important. And he uses any opportunity. You have noticed that he has used any opportunity to go back to that topic, even praising Joe Biden for keeping with the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, and saying that, well, that's the point in which Kamala Harris and Joe Biden begin to diverge, and that's the thing that would protect jobs in the United States. And that would be interesting how Walz answered to that. But no, Walz didn't really answer to it. Then they began to talk about abortion.
So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look.
Now, you might have noticed that he did something that did not come out as expected. You remember that Donald Trump said Roe v. Wade was overturned, so the states could take that matter into their own hands, like bring that closer to the people and not be a national matter, right? A federal matter. But you see Walz's answer or remark to this, and he's actually confirming that Donald Trump was right. Oh, what we did in Minnesota.
So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But
he's saying, Ed, we put women in charge of their health care. It's like what Trump wanted. It's not a federal thing. Now every state is gonna decide. It's like Tim Walz acknowledging that, yeah, he was following Trump's plan. It did not come out as expected.
I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids. It's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that.
Of course, and this is one of the few times that you see Vance nodding,
and it breaks your heart.
Because they're talking about these sensitive topics of women who have suffered in these extreme conditions, and they shouldn't have needed to. And of course, nobody wants to see women or children suffering. So that's why Vance nods.
Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA,
Okay, this soundbite that everyone is talking about, I became friends with school shooters. I am pretty sure. At first, I thought that he was meaning. Let me see. Go back to this. I thought that he could be saying that I have talked to school shooters. I have sat down to school shooters. But then, so many of you on X were making the remark that, hey, Jesus, maybe he was talking about the parents of Sandy Hook, and then he said that I become friends with victims of school shooters. He could be saying that because, not the deceased victims, of course, because people who have been hurt by school shooters. Maybe that's what was going through his mind, because I cannot understand the literal sentence. I become friends with school shooters. That doesn't make sense at all. And he doesn't even flinch when he says that.
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
This is the kind of moments at the debate that I thought that they were in fair agreements about a topic. But then we have, what do we have now? We have a next. Okay, they were talking a bit more about immigration, and Vance had the word here.
First of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country.
Now, that makes sense. It's like so many people. You have more people in space in a country, and you have limited housing, then the prices of the houses are going to go up. That's very, very, very basic economics.
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course...
Now, notice how Vance is saying that there's an actual connection between immigration and illegal immigration and the rising of house prices. And he's saying that. And notice how Walz, I'm going to zoom in.
Especially illegal immigration and higher housing prices. Now, of course...
Especially illegal immigration and raising house prices. And Walz nods. What was that? I think Vance was like a master hypnotist with this. And he played Walz like a puppet. How are you going to nod? How is Walz going to nod with that? That was so, that was impressive to watch. It's like he should have kept his mouth and his head still, and no, he just let it slip. He agreed something that Kamala Harris and himself have been against. So this was so amazing. Just in case, I'm gonna play the whole clip again, so you see the context in case you miss it and see how Walz nods.
Well, there's a Federal
head.
Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course,
he nods with his head. Oh, that was just amazing. That was just amazing. And then you're going to see that it's one of the few times that Vance deflects a question, but he does for a reason.
And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind? And
notice that Walz was really frustrated because he asked a direct question. That did Trump say, or didn't he say that that the 2020 election, that he won the 2020 elections? And Vance, without breaking a sweat, without mumbling or anything, he just deflected that question. Just deflected it. It was, I'm not going to answer. It was a non-answer. Again, it's, that Tim Walz gave some non-answers. This was Vance's turn to give a non-answer. But again, if he said yes or no, it was going to be that then if you do, damn if you don't moment. So I think that maybe avoiding the question and, of course, redirecting it to Kamala Harris was the right call. But again, you can fact-check me on this.
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
I mean, we were talking about the 2020 elections, and now we're talking about the COVID situation. Okay, well played.
That is a damning non-answer.
Has she?
Walz is right. Okay, team, you won this round. That is a damning non-answer. This is no other way to put it.
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship.
Notice how Vance doesn't even stop. It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. It's like, I'm going to talk about censorship. Stop talking about the 2020 elections. It was really fun to watch that
Obviously,
part.
Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further.
There were problems, but he is vague about the problems. But he continues, and Walz doubles down on his First Amendment opinions.
You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds.
Notice that he says that, Vance says that the First Amendment has to be like regulated, and Walz doubles down and said yes, and hate speech or threats or none of that, but all of that has to be silenced. So you tell me if how this really go in that regard. Now we're it's really close to the end of this analysis. Has been, I told you, was going to be longish. Was going to be a longish analysis. But in this case, we're going to talk about the closing remarks. The closing remarks are 1 minute each. I'm going to try to divide them and comment about them, but there's not much body language, but words. A lot of words, and words, the meaning of words can say a lot.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift.
Well, the Taylor Swift, I don't know. I don't know if that was a good idea. The Dancing with the Stars joke, I think that landed pretty well.
And a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people.
That is something that they have nailed over and over again. Remember that Kamala Harris has said that she's very optimistic, and she is happy about how optimistic are the American citizens. And well, you have to be optimistic to remain sane in these times.
They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you that that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy.
Which we really don't know what it is about, but you do you, Tim.
That works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is.
But that was not unexpected, talking about Donald Trump.
He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road.
Well, at least he did not say 2025 agenda. That's something.
Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy.
Politics of joy, that is important, of course, because joy is all that matters, I guess.
She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Many people are saying that, well, we're empty words. I see that there were the same filler words, the joy, the optimism. That is okay, but a bit lousy. I don't know. I have my reservations, especially about mentioning Taylor Swift. But again, the joke about Dancing with the Stars, I think was spot on. What about Vance? Let's listen to Vance.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies.
Notice that he wants to talk about Kamala's energy policies, but he uses this storytelling first about his grandmother and about all the American citizens, and make sure to paint all this scenario to make you feel this cold winter nights, and then he ends up mentioning Kamala Harris' energy policies.
I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies.
Notice his words, a nice meal. It is concrete. Maybe it's, I would say that it's vague enough so you can imagine yourself what is your mental image of a nice meal that instantly forms in your head, and you think about it, whatever pops in your head, what you think is a nice meal, and then you connect with that. That is harder to connect with words like Walz says, like being optimistic and joy, that are abstract concepts. So maybe Vance doesn't have to be as concrete, but he uses the right, let's say, emotional words, so that he can spark all those images and emotions in our minds and connect with us.
I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed.
Now, you might have noticed that all this time in his final remarks, he has done what essentially Walz has been doing with Donald Trump. He has been hammering the fact of Kamala Harris, and he has mentioned so far like 3 arguments about Kamala Harris, and he wants to make sure to say all this to, well, end up here.
She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people.
He is speaking like Donald Trump right now.
Anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well.
That is a solid argument. You remember Donald Trump, you remember how you were in his term. That's what he's using to convince people.
Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
It was nice. I wouldn't have said, please vote for Donald Trump. That likes like begging. I would have this personal taste. I would have been more direct. Vote for Donald Trump. And then
please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you.
He's also mentioning Tim Walz, for to try to combat all that division and say that, well, you are free, as I've said so many times. You are free to vote for whoever you want. That is the most important thing. And now we have the last part when we can actually see. I'm going to lower the volume of all this. We don't need any sort of volume right now. We can see the final handshake. And the final handshake was, Walz was really an open hand, and Vance was really friendly, like throwing his hand from way behind, and they had a solid eye contact and solid handshake just in a few seconds. And a solid handshake. Vance touched him in the arm, and Walz touched him in the arm as well. You know that Kennedy handshake. You touch the arm, and when they release hands, Walz touches him in the other arm as well. It was very friendly. It was a very friendly exchange afterwards. It was nice to see them talking that way. They were really engaged. I think they realized at the end that they were they agreed in many topics, and even if they are opponents, but you remember that Vance made sure to give all those remarks that driving Walz to agree with him in a reactive way. Remember that it's much better. Some things you act in a proactive way. You do things first, like giving your hand first, like doing this kind of strategies first. That is important. And then their wives arrive. They greet each other. It was also nice to see. They cross-greet. It was so very nice. And they were still talking, but I think this is we could say that this is kind of fair play, right? The way they interacted. I'm going to play this all the way to the end while I give some remarks, and just to make it clear that I mentioned a couple of things that you were going to learn. I hope that you learned a lot through this analysis. I enjoyed it a lot. It was great how they said goodbye to the hosts. Was really wholesome that goodbye. But I'm going to switch this to one of the initial parts of the debate, so I can talk about my closing remarks, my own closing remarks. I don't. Okay, let's. This one is nice. Or my closing remarks. I'm going to with my headshot. I talk about how do you command a conversation. How do you command a conversation? Notice how Vance made sure that even if the first question was about Israel, he made sure to talk about 1 minute and 45 or 1 minute to introduce himself, then 45 seconds to drive the point home that Donald Trump wanted to achieve peace through strength. And it was not until the final 15 seconds that he answered the questions. That's how you control and you command a conversation. Sometimes it's not what they ask you, but you want to make sure to drive the point home in your own terms, and that's what Vance did. How to use advanced persuasion techniques to make someone agree with you. You can weaponize empathy by the way of reciprocity. You do something and expect that in return. But in this case, Vance made sure to agree on like invite Walz to agree on less. So every topic was serious, but some topics were more pressing than others. But in the first topics, Vance made sure to make Walz agree with him. So in the most serious and pressing, even when Vance said at the end that yes, like illegal migrants drive house prices up, you saw that Walz nodded. It was the effect of that persuasion technique, that reciprocity. Vance did it first, then Walz did it and in a reactive way, and you saw the final result. Try to apply that, by the way. And how do you disarm someone's argument before they bring it up? It was when Vance was talking about the carbon emissions. He knew that he was not going to enter in a debate about weird science or the denying of yes or no about carbon emissions. Let's say that carbon emissions are the main driver of climate change. Let's say that you're right. Now what? That completely disarms the other party. Let's say that you're right. Now what? That is a way to get that weapon out of their hands and use that against them. So many things that so here, I know that I missed a lot of things in here because it was really fast, but again, I enjoyed making this analysis for you. And if you stay till the end, remember to download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video, and you will be subscribed to my emails and tips of body language, persuasion, human behavior, and more. My body language buddies, my name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy. Much love and bliss.